Well, thanks everyone for coming today. This is my second visit to the Tea Party here in Teaneck. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. How many people were here last time when I spoke? There were. And there's still people filing in and everything. We were talking a lot about the Awan brothers and Imran Awan and his involvement with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the whole thing that was going on with them hacking laptops and cell phones at Congress. And that's been an ongoing situation. It has not been resolved yet, of course. Did you want to say some stuff, Laura, before we begin?
Go right ahead, Jason. Go right ahead.
Okay. So what I wanted to talk about today was the a lot of people have been asking me about the Second Amendment and changes to gun laws here in New Jersey. And of course, that's been coming under fire. We've seen all of these mass shootings, and it's quite shocking to me. I remember when Columbine happened, that was a real shock to me. It seemed like one of the worst things that ever occurred, and now I feel like we can't really go for more than a couple of weeks without one of these things happening. And the conversation always seems to turn to gun control. I don't think there's been enough conversation about mental health and some of the other causes of these things. Now, at the risk of being very controversial, I also want to talk about something that people may have heard of or may not have heard of, and that is the National Defense Authorization Act. Do people know what this is? Have you guys heard about the NDAA? See, that's very interesting to me because, of course, we know about the Church Committee hearings, right? Does everybody recall that? Yes. Senator Church was investigating the activities of the CIA. And at that time, we learned that the CIA was involved in a number of clandestine operations. And the Church Committee happened sometime after the revelations of Daniel Ellsberg in releasing the Pentagon Papers. You guys remember the Pentagon Papers, right? Long time ago, right? That was 1971? 1971, something like that. And of course, this was shocking, I think, to most people in America to realize that the CIA was involved in these types of activities, things like Operation Mockingbird. Do people remember what Operation Mockingbird was? The CIA actually placed operatives into the major news media outlets, including CBS, NBC, the New York Times. And we've got similar things happening today, of course. All of these outlets that I'm speaking about are owned by major corporations. They take ads from other major corporations. And basically, these companies that stand to earn billions of dollars are having an undue influence on the news that we hear. Whether it's pharmaceutical companies, I think you guys know, whether you're watching Fox News or MSNBC or whatever it might be, it seems like every commercial is for some pharmaceutical product or some gasoline company or some big automaker. And of course, during the Super Bowl, we've seen ads for Lockheed Martin and some of these really big military industrial contractors. And I believe these ads are being placed on these major networks as a way of sort of paying these networks so that they can have some degree of influence over what is said. Now, part of the reason why I created Crowdsource the Truth, and I don't know how many people in the audience are watching Crowdsource the Truth regularly, glad to see that, thank you very much. Part of the reason that I created it was that I feel that there is an inherent conflict when we have these large corporate-owned, advertiser-driven news sources, whether it's the New York Times or the Washington Post. And of course, we've heard that the Washington Post was purchased by Jeff Bezos, I think in about 2014. So that's a relatively new development. And of course, Jeff Bezos, wealthiest man in the world, owner of Amazon.com. Amazon.com has a $600 million a year cloud data services contract with the CIA.
Actually, we just lost it, Jason.
Lost what?
They lost that contract. It went over to Oracle.
Oh, they did?
Yep.
They lost it. It went to Oracle.
Yep.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
It just happened.
Is that good?
So
Yeah.
we've just heard that Amazon no longer controls that contract. So that is good, and I'd like to learn more about that. But we're still looking at this situation where, you know, multi-billionaires who are invested in all these different things are controlling the news. So to sort of free the news from the grip of the military, industrial, technocratic empire that controls most of our world and most of our lives here, I wanted to create Crowdsource the Truth as an independent news resource where individuals like yourselves can interact with the community, the crowdsourced community, and share information like Laura just told me, that Oracle now has the cloud data services with the CIA. I guess that's better than the company that owns the Washington Post. But why do we have a corporation controlling the data for our most secretive intelligence service? And frankly, why are they so secretive? How do we know that the CIA is operating to our benefit? It takes me back to this National Defense Authorization Act, and of course this church committee hearing where they were investigating the CIA. They were talking about some of these clandestine operations, some of the clandestine activities of the CIA. Of course, Frank Church was the senator who headed that up. I don't know if people remember watching that, but there was a revelation by, I think it was William Colby, was the director of the CIA at the time, and I believe Colby gave testimony about a heart attack gun. Have people heard about this?
A heart attack gun?
A heart attack gun. The CIA had developed a clandestine weapon, secretive weapon, that basically was firing a poison dart. And the dart was a liquid poison derived from shellfish that would be fashioned in essentially the shape of like a sewing needle. And it could enter the victim's body through a very small pinprick hole, and the projectile and the poison would dissolve in the victim, causing a heart attack. Now, if this were fired at someone 50, 60, 70 years old and they died of a heart attack, this is considered death by natural causes. The autopsy would not be searching for this very exotic poison. They'd say heart attack, and that would essentially be the end of the story. William Colby, of course, died in a kayaking accident fairly shortly after the revelations of the Church Committee, but it leaves us, as the American public, really wondering what else the CIA might be up to. And there's really very little oversight. Oh, that's funny to see who comes up next. I did not plan that. CIA agent says war is eugenics and the drug war is fake. Let's not worry about that for right now. But I want to get back to this National Defense Authorization Act. Now that sounds like something we would want. We're all interested in national defense. And of course, this act, which was passed, I believe, on Christmas Eve or right before Christmas in 2016, just before Mr. Trump came in as president, Barack Obama signed this act, the National Defense Authorization Act, that included in it something called the Smith Modernization Act, and basically it allowed for agents of the U.S. government, including clandestine services like the CIA, to use propaganda against U.S. citizens. And that becomes a very difficult thing to wrap our minds around. Where does a campaign like that start? Where does it end? How will this propaganda be used? And what is the propaganda? Is there a war on against the citizens of the United States, and is it being waged by the clandestine intelligence services that we all expect to be protecting us? How many people remember the Iran-Contra scandal? Do people remember what that was about? What the CIA was doing?
Guns for drugs.
Guns for drugs, exactly. The CIA, under the direction of George Herbert Walker Bush, who later became the president. And I know we're here at a Tea Party meeting, and most of us are conservatives and Republicans, and I don't know if people are going to be dissatisfied if I speak badly about George H.W. Bush. He's one of my least favorite guys, and he did a lot of things as the director of the CIA and prior to becoming the director of the CIA that I think a lot of us would object to. So just blindly following these intelligence agencies, whether they decide they want to go against the will of the Congress and the people of the United States and sell weapons to a country like Iran, despite sanctions, economic sanctions against them for taking American citizens hostage, whether they want to do that or they want to have this Smith Modernization Act, how do we know where their activities will end and who they serve? If people have been watching Crowdsource the Truth, you may have seen that we've been interviewing a gentleman by the name of Harmon Wilfred. Harmon Wilfred is America's first refugee. Harmon was working as a contractor to the CIA. He was a financial expert, and he had been approached after his service in the Air Force, partly due to having a security clearance, to work with the CIA on clearing these financial instruments that were worth billions of dollars. Last night we were speaking about U.S. war bonds from 1949, gold bearer bonds held by the Chinese that were so controversial they needed to be verified and confirmed in all kinds of different ways. There were coupons on these bearer bonds that had been used by Oliver North, quite possibly for Iran-Contra. Now, Harmon was an unwitting asset in this. He wasn't aware of what it was that he was doing until he was well in it. And he describes through a series of episodes that everyone else that he was working with was murdered by the CIA. He's now living essentially in exile in New Zealand, hasn't seen his wife in 2.5 years, hasn't seen his children from his first marriage in over 20 years. He's been forced to relinquish his U.S. citizenship, unable to get New Zealand citizenship, and he has been persecuted by the Clintons, their lawyers, including Gregory Craig, who's still working as a lawyer in Washington, D.C. today. This man has been persecuted simply for being honest and trying to blow the whistle on the activities of the CIA. And frankly, as I have been bringing his story to the public, I have come under fire quite heavily by a variety of individuals who, for all I know, could be paid by the CIA. I can't say for sure. It seems far-fetched, it seems quite crazy, but yet we have this National Defense Authorization Act that does allow the CIA to act in such a way. This article here in Zero Hedge talks about, it showed this image from the classic film based on the book, 1984. And it's talking about how in one of his last acts, Mr. Obama, who I'm sure we have a lot of Obama fans here tonight, Mr. Obama passed this act creating essentially the Ministry of Truth. We've heard a lot about fake news. This was a meme created, I believe, by the Washington Post. In an excellent bit of internet and Twitter jujitsu, Mr. Trump has turned it around by calling Jim Acosta of CNN fake news, and now it's hard to say who's utilizing it as a weapon. But this concept of fake news is a pretty new item in our in our day-to-day, vernacular. It's become a part of our vocabulary. But who decides what is real news, what is fake news? And we've been speaking a lot before about the Second Amendment. Well, what about the First Amendment? Because before we exercise our right to utilize, to bear arms and utilize those arms to protect against tyranny, because of course I think we all understand the Second Amendment is there not to protect hunters, not to protect criminals who want to shoot each other or lunatics who want to shoot up a school, but as a check and balance against a tyrannical government. Militias and individuals are...
That means we should have bazookas and stealth fighters.
I agree with you, sir. I'm not a gun owner, but I staunchly defend your right to have a bazooka and a tank
Right.
and an AR-15.
To be on par with the government that is looking to...
It's exactly the intended purpose, to hold a tyrannical government at bay. Yes, sir.
Has President Trump said anything? What's going on?
I'm not sure what President Trump has said or if he has said anything, but I wanted to tell everybody about this National Defense Authorization Act because it's one of these things that they're not really informing everyone of because they don't really want you to know about it. This is the de facto Ministry of Truth that's being created, and we've heard a lot lately about how Facebook is working with Cambridge Analytica and siphoning everyone's data, how we're being spied on, in many cases voluntarily, sharing our information through the GPS technology in our phones, the cameras, the microphones, smart TVs that have cameras that can see you in your home. I mean, it really is a situation vastly beyond what Orwell could have imagined. And the implementation of this Ministry of Truth, essentially, that allows the government to determine what is fake news and to suppress fake news, this is a very dangerous thing. Because if I go on the internet with my own news broadcast and I say something like, hey, what if all these mass shootings are orchestrated events, a calculated war against the citizenry of the United States? And what if targeting young high school students, burgeoning adults who are about to go out into the world, into college, where they're going to form their opinions about themselves and the world and the government, and they're going to decide what their future careers will be? This is a very susceptible group, and if they can voluntarily call out against the Second Amendment and against guns, well, that's a very strange situation. And truth has been weaponized because there's all these things. We've heard that there was a deputy there in Broward County who spoke out against some of the official story and that he showed up dead. Has anyone heard that story?
Yes, I heard of it. 40 years old.
42-year-old police officer. Now, I would like to confirm that story. I've heard it, but we don't know if it's true. Now, again, it's become very difficult to know what is true and what is not true. I'm not intimately familiar with this website, Fellowship of the Minds, but do you know that? Yeah. I've seen this photograph of this officer before, and I definitely want people to investigate this and find out if, in fact, Broward County Deputy Jason Fitzsimmons did die as a result, or what the circumstances were surrounding him. So we know there are these clandestine methods through which people can be silenced, and certainly, so he's a Second Amendment proponent, and he criticized the Marjorie Stoneman gun control cavalcade. According to James Tracy, sometime on around April 1st, the sheriff's deputy, Jason Fitzsimmons, he was 42 in an excellent state of mind and health, called in sick, and shortly thereafter he was found dead. And there's been a complete news blackout. So, this is the type of story that I'm presenting to the crowd, not just you guys here, but to our audience on Facebook and YouTube and Periscope, and of course, we're on Vimeo. We're utilizing all of these social media platforms because there's a lot of people who have a tremendous ability to chase these kind of stories down. People who live in Broward County, maybe people who know this individual. This social media thing that on the one hand is being used almost as a weapon against us when Cambridge Analytica can siphon all of our data, and who knows who Cambridge Analytica is servicing with that data. Well, it can also be a tool for our benefit. We can connect and communicate. I can put out a video like this. Here I can speak to 20 or 30 people, but of course hundreds or even thousands of people can see this video stream and can look into whether or not this is a factual news story. I've heard it quite a few times, and that doesn't necessarily make it factual, but it is of great interest. And I certainly don't want some Barack Obama ordained government truth ministry to tell me that that's fake news. And I don't want Snopes to tell me that. I don't want the Anti-Defamation League to tell me that. I don't want the Southern Poverty Law Center to tell me that. I want us to have the freedom before we get to the hopefully never needing to exercise our Second Amendment rights of taking up arms. I want us to utilize our First Amendment rights to be able to speak about this. And people have become very confused about what the First Amendment right is. I certainly don't have a right to accuse individuals of crimes without evidence. That is slander, libel, defamation, all of these things. But I certainly have a right to say, hey, there's an article here on the internet, and I've heard it quite a few times, that this sheriff's deputy has shown up dead. Is this true? Someone said that one of the young students at the high school, that his father worked for the FBI, and that he was 19 and not actually a student enrolled in the high school there. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I like the idea that we can raise that as a point of discussion and explore that collectively, that we can utilize our rights, that we can assemble, whether it's in public or on the internet, and we can exercise our First Amendment right to discuss these topics and to try to get to the bottom of it. Now, there is a case in which I have called out certain individuals for crimes, and that's when I have evidence. I am acting as a journalist, of course, in my endeavors with Crowdsource the Truth. I'm trying to explore news, and I haven't been to journalism school. I don't have a job with CNN. But you know, I decided after watching CNN and reading the New York Times and watching MSNBC and watching Fox and reading the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post that certainly all those people who have won Pulitzer Prizes and who have been to journalism school, well, they're not doing a very good job either, because there are so many things that they've told us that just seem totally implausible. I do not believe that one man, Lee Harvey Oswald, could have shot from the 6th floor of the book depository and that the crime could have gone the way that they told us. I do not believe that 19 individuals who were unemployed, who could barely speak English, who were foreign nationals, could come to major cities in the United States and rent apartments. You can't do that, not without a guarantor. I don't believe that they would have sufficient money for food, for flight training. Someone had to be financing these individuals. There had to be a greater conspiracy than just the 19. I do not believe that a 64-year-old man took 23 guns to the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay to shoot up a concert. And I do not believe that the autopsies conducted by the coroner's office there in Clark County, I don't think they make sense. I don't think they've been conducted properly. Yet the news, the journalists, the people with the Pulitzer Prizes and the degrees would have us all believe this stuff. So back to these essentially bi-monthly mass shootings. Is this a years-long, ongoing campaign? Is this a psychological war against the people of the United States of America, against you citizens of New Jersey, you supporters of the Second Amendment? Yes, sir.
You think this is socialism or communism?
I don't know that I'm qualified to characterize it like that. I think it's a new form of assault on us. It's a new form of enslavement of the population where we, when the Nazis rolled into Poland with tanks and guns and shot the place up, that was terror. People were afraid, and for a while it certainly looked like the Nazis would take over the world. But their reign ended. They were defeated, it would seem. And of course, we also know from our friend Daniel Ellsberg and from the Pentagon Papers that the CIA had a clandestine program called Operation Paperclip. Have people heard of that? Well, Nazi officers, Nazi scientists, Nazi war criminals, instead of being tried at The Hague, many of them were brought to the United States. They were given new identities. They were given government jobs. They were given jobs at NASA. They were given jobs at the CIA.
Who authorized that? Who was the president then?
It's an excellent question. Let's take a look at Operation Paperclip. We can look it up right here on Wikipedia.
It was right after, yeah, it had to be Truman.
So here is Operation Paperclip.
They brought the ball in,
And again,
they were the ones
this
who made
is,
the bomb in the Manhattan Project.
yeah, it's
People.
sort of widely known, but it's also not that widely known. The point I'm getting at is there was an infiltration to some extent. People would argue, some people would argue, that what was his name? Allen, the CIA guy who hated Kennedy.
Dulles.
Allen Dulles, right, who was key in the formation of the CIA. Well, he had certain ideas that were in line with the Nazis. And of course, Prescott Bush, he laundered millions of dollars for the Nazis through his Union Bank. And his son was George Herbert Walker Bush. And this is obviously a dynastic political family in the United States. Many people look shocked to hear me saying this, but I believe it's possible that there was a high-level Nazi infiltration of the U.S. government. And since World War II, they have been conducting a slow, soft war against the people of the United States. The purpose of that war is to create a one-world government which things like the United Nations and NAFTA and the EU are all baby steps in walking us toward this. And certainly having a check and balance of an armed citizenry, people who support the Second Amendment, is incompatible with this idea of taking us all over slowly. So let's speculate for a moment if this is some sort of psychological operation. And I'm not saying that people aren't being shot in these incidents. I do believe people are. But when we talk about the notion of a false flag operation, this is an idea that comes from the ancient activities, or I don't know about ancient, but historical activities of pirate ships, where they weren't sailing around with a skull and crossbones flag saying, hey, we're pirates. They would fly a British flag and approach a merchant marine ship that would look through the binoculars and say, oh, great, British ship, we're safe. And then the pirates arrive and they take over the ship and they kill him. So obviously, if someone wants you to think that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John F. Kennedy, or someone wants you to think that Stephen Paddock shot up the concert, there's a lot of things that need to be done to cover up the actual facts, to create a false flag scenario. And we hear all these conflicting reports. In the case of Las Vegas, we've got eyewitnesses who say they heard shots coming from all around them. We've got all of these inconsistencies with the crime scene photos in the hotel room, the Las Vegas Metro PD changing their story. They can't remember if they shot Paddock, if he shot himself. Height discrepancies from his recorded height on his hunting license to the height recorded on his autopsy, photographs of him with a tattoo, without a tattoo. I can't come to a specific conclusion about it, but there are all these strange anomalies with that very complex crime, and yet it seems to have somewhat vanished from the mainstream news. So it was important to me to create an independent news agency that was not financed by ads from big companies or some investor with millions of dollars, because just like I don't want Merck Pharmaceuticals telling a producer at CBS News, hey, you can't run a story about the 1984 Vaccine Injury Act, and you can't tell people that it reclassified vaccines as biological rather than pharmaceutical, that it created a windfall industry for pharmaceutical companies to introduce all of these possibly superfluous vaccines to load up our children with these, let's face it, drugs that, because of this reclassification, are subject to far less stringent testing than a pharmaceutical that an adult would take. And in some cases, there are even statistically significant results that show that certain specific vaccines, the Merck DPT vaccine, are injuring certain specific segments of the population. In the case of that vaccine, it was black male children 18 to 36 months. Now, that's a very valuable study that was conducted by the CDC that was buried, and it was leaked by a CDC scientist to a producer of a major news program who was told by the higher-ups, you can't run that story because Merck is a major advertiser. So part of what I'm trying to do with Crowdsource the Truth is to create a distributed funding model for the news, where if 57,000 people or 500,000 people are watching my news program, I don't want an investor or an advertiser to come along and say, hey, you know, I pay you $100,000 a month or $5 a month or whatever the number is. I want to distribute the cost of running this business over as wide a range of people as possible so that each individual sponsor is not put under any financial burden. If it was 100,000 people paying $1 per year or something like that, that's a very low impact on the individuals, and you can know that no one is having an undue influence on the news. So that's a little bit of a new model that I'm trying to introduce, but at the same time, it's also a somewhat interactive process in that anyone here or anyone watching this program right now, which just on the live stream alone, we have 245 people watching on YouTube. We've got several hundred people watching on Periscope. We've got people watching on Facebook. And so we can utilize these social media networks to assemble as the public. And this is kind of a check and balance against these large corporations that control the flow of information to each of us and try to hide things like they're not telling you about the Operation Paperclip. They're not telling you about the Defense Authorization Act and the fact that they now are able to use propaganda, and they're able to tell you, hey, this kid, he knows what happened at the high school. He's going to tell you this is the story. This sheriff from Las Vegas, he knows what happened in the shooting. He's going to tell you the story, and nobody else is allowed to investigate. Well, I want to tell you a little bit about what has been happening to me since I started Crowdsource the Truth, and since I started speaking with people like Harmon Wilfred, who is America's first refugee. This is a man who's been speaking out, or trying to speak out, about serious financial crimes, crimes that appear to be linked to the Clintons, to the Clinton Foundation, to things like Iran-Contra. I mean, these are massive, massive crimes. If you've listened to Charles Ortel at all, if you've read any of the books from Peter Schweitzer or heard him speak, the Clinton Foundation, evidence seems to indicate their failure to ever be properly organized, their material misrepresentation of facts, their illegal solicitation of funds for charitable efforts that they are not properly registered to do. This amazing collection of evidence of financial crime indicate that the Clinton Foundation, William J. Clinton Foundation, Clinton Health Access Initiative, all the various iterations seem to be the largest money laundering scheme in the history of mankind. Now, where has that money gone? What has that money been used to do? And what would the beneficiaries of that money do to someone like me or anyone engaged in independent journalism who isn't receiving some funds to toe the line, as it were, and tell the story that they would like to have told? Well, I can tell you what's been happening to me. I personally have been sued for $15,350,000 by an individual named Robert David Steele. Now, Robert David Steele claims to be a former CIA clandestine case officer. I don't know if that's true or not true, but many people tell me that it is, and he has adamantly supported that assertion. And so the question becomes, is he retired from the CIA, or is he still working for the CIA? And even if he's not, is he using CIA tactics against me to try to suppress information that I want to bring to you? I can tell you that I first met Robert David Steele when he came onto my program to raise money for a campaign that he calls Unrig. He wanted $250,000 to travel around the country speaking to people like yourselves, American citizens, and talking about how he was going to unrig the voting system, how he was going to change it up with the help of former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, staunch anti-Israel, pro-Islam, female congresswoman from, I think, Georgia. They were going to unrig the system, and that's fine. I actually was a big supporter of Cynthia McKinney. I liked that she stood up to Donald Rumsfeld and asked hard questions about 9/11. But I've learned since then that just seeing somebody in a speech on C-SPAN saying or doing something, well, I don't know if that's real or if that's intended to gain my trust so that some deception can be slipped in there. Anyway, Robert David Steele came on my program. In the course of about an hour or two, our audience raised $15,000 for this charitable organization, a 501c3 tax-exempt charity. Now, there's a lot of laws that govern the operation of these 501c3s. Of course, the Clinton Foundation is a 501c3, and in addition to being registered as a tax-exempt organization, these types of charities need to be specifically registered in each state they operate in. You can't just go around soliciting funds in New York without being registered with the New York State Bureau of Charities. Now, there's a lot of stuff that happened after Robert David Steele raised this money that I don't think we want to go into specifically right now, but I discovered that Robert David Steele, it seemed, was lying to me. He told me in an email that I was going to be arrested by the New York Police Department for calling in a bomb threat to the port of Charleston, something I certainly did not do. Something that individuals who I have come to understand may in fact be working for Robert David Steele or in collusion with. I have evidence to indicate that these people may be working with Robert David Steele to give me information about uranium being shipped on the Maersk Memphis to the port of Charleston and encouraging me to broadcast this information. And of course, we all know if you see something, say something. This could be a disaster on the level of 9/11. Now we're getting into real psychological manipulation. I was there on 9/11. I watched the towers burn from the roof of my apartment building in New York City. I have friends who were killed on 9/11. Someone even saying that we could have a disaster on the scale of 9/11 obviously gets us all very emotionally affected. So, of course, my instinct was we've got to tell the authorities. We've got to make sure the Coast Guard knows and they can check this ship before anything happens, because this information was corroborated by articles from 2015 saying that a Maersk vessel had run aground, and the government of, I believe it was Sri Lanka, found high, dangerous levels of radiation that led them to believe that there could have been a danger of radiological material on that ship. Now, I'm looking for a quote from Lindsey Graham, who I believe said that a dirty bomb was one of the biggest threats to national security. So, again, I had a lot of reason to believe that there was a potential risk to the people of South Carolina there. And without getting into too much detail about that, what quickly happened was Robert David Steele crafted this narrative that I had created a bomb hoax, which I certainly did not. Information was given to me, was corroborated by news stories, stoked by fear, and I was encouraged to push this out to my audience and to the authorities. And right away, Robert David Steele the next day said, "Oh, you've called in a dirty bomb hoax." He has various people on YouTube. He has assembled, I believe, a cyber militia. There are people who I have observed working with Robert David Steele in subversive ways, putting out news stories that are untrue, telling people that I'm a Mossad agent. I'm not. I've never been to Israel. I've never dealt with the Mossad. Yet they put out this propaganda to try to convince people that they should not listen to me, that they should not listen to my news, that they should not financially support me. And now, as I've been revealing information from high-level CIA whistleblowers like Harmon Wilfred, as I've been working with some of the most sophisticated investigators in the world like Charles Ortel, there has been an incredibly aggressive push to silence me that has now graduated into a campaign to have me federally indicted as a terrorist for what they consider a dirty bomb hoax that they say I created. But in fact, it's the individuals that are pushing for this indictment that created this hoax, that put in place the various individuals and the various pieces of information that were brought to me to entrap me into a situation that they can now use to silence me. So the first step in that effort was Robert David Steele brought a $15 million lawsuit against me. And it's a very complicated scenario, and they've done it like that on purpose because they want it to be complicated for people to understand and easy for them to manipulate into a scenario where, you know, people just, their eyes gloss over and they don't want to listen and they're not sure what I'm talking about. But Robert David Steele has submitted in federal court a complaint against me and two other individuals who I have no official affiliation with. One of them is a person who goes by the codename Queen Tut. Now, Queen Tut is a nickname that I gave to this person who came to me as a confidential source of information. And her email was with a website called tutanoa.com. So Tut, Queen Tut, she was a woman. Tut was the first thing that came to my mind. This is a person who had told me that her name is Susan Lutsky. However, this Susan Lutsky is a very deceptive individual who has been lying about many things, who has submitted fraudulent documents to the court, and who I now believe was inserted into my sphere of crowdsource the truth and this lawsuit specifically as an agent of deception and almost as a lawsuit double agent. I know it sounds crazy, but this person is a co-defendant who I believe is working with the plaintiff to frame me in this lawsuit. Because what's happened is, suing Queen Tut, I mean, this is like suing Mickey Mouse or the Easter Bunny. Who is Queen Tut? Initially, the suit was served to a woman named Carla Howell. Now, I don't know how they ever came to believe that that was this person's name, but I believe it was part of a trick. Because what happened was, obviously I had to answer this lawsuit, as frivolous as it is, it's submitted in federal court, and if I do nothing, it will result in a default judgment, which will result in this person being able to hire U.S. Marshals to come and put liens on my property and my bank accounts. And there's a very good example of someone who, at very least, is a former CIA agent misusing the legal system to suppress my right, my First Amendment right, my constitutional rights to say, I have evidence that this person's 501c3 organization is operating fraudulently in the state of New York. The lack of registration with the New York State Bureau of Charities indicates that the solicitation of $250,000 in the state of New York over the internet is felony charity fraud. That's journalism. When I alert the public that there is a charity out there that is a fraud, that if you try to take a tax write-off, you could be in trouble. If you give money to this fraud, we don't know what's going to happen to it. That's journalism. Now, what happened was I answered the lawsuit pro se, because part of what they want to do is they want to drain me financially. I'm not making a lot of money as a journalist. I've only been doing this for a year. And as I said, Crowdsource the Truth relies on the support of the community of viewers, individuals who will sponsor the program for $1 per month, $5, $10, whatever it might be. But it's not like some huge money-making endeavor. I'm not getting rich doing this. And they recognize that by bringing this lawsuit against me, I would have a variety of options. Hire a lawyer, create some kind of financial settlement with them to make it go away, or use my own time, really one of my most valuable resources for all of us, to answer this lawsuit pro se, which I did. And of course, because we had this kind of fake co-defendant, this Susan Lutsky, who I believe is actually Susan Holmes, who they initially served as Carla Howell, a ridiculous name that they came up with seemingly out of nowhere. Well, what this did was it afforded them an opportunity to have sort of a ripcord in the lawsuit. And they magically discovered that this was the wrong person that they had served, and so now they're serving Susan Lutsky. Now, the interesting thing is they've amended their complaint here, and in the amended complaint, one of the things that they use, these are all Twitter messages being sent out by this person, Susan Holmes, Susan Lutsky, accusing the plaintiff of all kinds of things. And of course, because she's a co-defendant, they are ostensibly blaming me for things that she does. This is a person I haven't spoken to in months. I have no influence over, no control over. She's now been spreading lies about me, actively telling people. She published my parents' phone number on the internet and told people to call up my mother and tell her that I'm a stalker and a pedophile. Shocking, isn't it?
Is she allowed to do that?
Well, it is harassment, of course, but when I called the police in Fort Collins, Colorado, where this woman resides, incidentally, the police think her name is Susan Holmes. They were very reluctant to prosecute her because politically they have a complicated situation in that her son attacked the police with a deadly weapon and attempted to murder a police officer and was neutralized by two very responsible police officers, one of the Fort Collins Police Department, one of the Colorado State University campus police. And so they're reluctant to prosecute her because she's been a big problem. She's been going all over town, and she's been going to town hall meetings, claiming that the police and the district attorney are racists, and there she is. You can see her there. This is a video that I produced talking about how Susan Holmes has gone to college campuses to protests. Can you see the sign that she's holding there? It's instructing college students to kill all police because according to her, they're killing us. Now, this is a call to violence. This is inciting others to do a criminal act. This is not intended to warn anyone. This is specifically intended to incite people. And I believe she should be prosecuted for this.
You're not going to do anything with her now after this?
I don't know. I hope they will. The interesting thing is, I published this video to indicate that we now know who this woman is. I believe we do. The police in Fort Collins seem to think she's Susan Holmes. So it's interesting. This screenshot of my video I'm showing you is coming right out of Robert David Steele's amended lawsuit. This amendment to the complaint was just approved by the court last week. And now I've got to answer another complaint. So the complaint now has ballooned from 40 some odd pages to 97 pages. Now, this, in my view, is a lawyer, Stephen S. Biss, attempting to bury me in bureaucratic process and hoping that me as a non-lawyer, well, that I'll make some kind of mistake in the filing or I'll miss a date, and that they will, not on the merit of their complaints, but on the tricky, deceptive nature of the low, dastardly things that they do as a pattern and practice, that they can take advantage of me, that they can take advantage of the court system, and that they can bring this punitive lawsuit against me to prevent me from reporting the type of news that I am reporting about public fraud, about a website called Steemit.com, which is a blockchain-driven, cryptocurrency-backed social media network that I have explored evidence and presented evidence that seems to indicate is a controlled network that is being deceptively marketed to people and possibly part of a cryptocurrency scam. The Steemit platform is tied to a cryptocurrency called Steem. A lot of people have heard of Bitcoin. And traditional investors and traditionally minded people, you guys don't look very much to me like cryptographers or hackers or video gamers. You look like a little bit more of a traditional crowd to me. Cryptocurrency is a bit of a mystery, and I'm not saying that it is a scam, but because it is complicated and new and not regulated, it is certainly a marketplace that is ripe for scammers. And I have been exploring evidence and testimony from experts that lead me to believe that it is possible that this cryptocurrency Steem could in fact be a Ponzi scheme, a system that is trying to be propped up by this manipulated network, Steemit.com, in order to increase the value of this Steem dollar. And that could be fine, that could be a legitimate business, but if it's not regulated, and if illegal or deceptive business practices are being employed to increase the value of that currency, well, that's something that the users of the system should be made aware of. And as I've been trying to make people aware of it, well, I've just come under more and more attacks from people like Robert David Steele. Now, the reason I keep coming back to this lawsuit, because I find it very important, and I find it very interesting that obviously Robert David Steele's lawyer saw this video that I presented. He's even using it in his amended complaint. But yet, he's chosen to serve Susan Lutsky, not Susan Holmes. Yes, sir.
I can't see who's holding that poster.
You can't see?
I don't see, I can't see who's holding that poster.
There's a woman right behind here who is hiding behind the sign, who is...
So how do you know who that person is?
Because she was a former associate of mine before I knew she was an anarchist and a pro-violence, anti-cop. She called me and told me that she went to this protest and held up this sign. And I got this photograph from a news article about her that named her as Susan Holmes, as the person at this event. And when I spoke to the police in Fort Collins, Colorado, they were aware that she did this, but they were reluctant to prosecute her for it because of the political controversy that's been stirred up when her mentally ill, violent, dangerous son attempted to kill a police officer and had to be shot by the police.
You see, I see the person behind that has black hair, and the person on the left is a blonde.
This person does not have black hair. This is Susan Lutsky. It could be the lighting of the photograph.
But the person on the left is a blonde.
I think,
Well-
Jason, a lot of what you're just talking about happened to us at the Tea Party.
Yes.
We weren't sued formally like this, but we had infiltrators, we were slimy, we were called racist and
Right.
homophobic and horrible people. We used to have 150 people at the Harley Davidson dealership
Right.
at our meetings, right? And we talked to you earlier, we went to all of these protests, and they didn't even count that we were there. There were 1 million people.
Right.
So we had to go underground. So you can't go underground because you're a new media
Right.
person,
Right.
right? But we went underground, and that's the only way you can really escape them,
Well,
is to go underground.
but I don't think we should have to do that. I
No,
think that
but
you
that's-
guys have your rights to express
Right.
your opinions and to meet and to collectively, in a nonviolent way, discuss your feelings that you're taxed enough already. And you shouldn't be subjected to infiltration, particularly not by government agents. Now, I don't know if these people are or are not. And sir, I understand your skepticism, but I assure you that is Susan Holmes.
You given evidence, other evidence that
Yes.
assured me that it was her.
Yes.
From the picture, one can't tell, but you've
Right.
given other evidence.
Yes.
I accept it.
And the point being, obviously the lawyer bringing this suit against me saw this video and is aware that this person very likely is Susan Holmes, yet they've served Susan Lutsky and are moving forward with the lawsuit. I believe the reason that they're doing this is because they want me to be forced to answer this 97-page complaint, and then they're going to say, oh, whoops, we served the wrong defendant again, and now we're going to serve Susan Holmes. So what we see is a former CIA agent and his twice sanctioned by the Bar Association lawyer misusing the legal system in Virginia, misusing the time of judges and court clerks and things that the taxpayers of Virginia are paying for to take punitive action against me as a journalist for utilizing my first.
Is a frivolous lawsuit eventually?
Well,
It's so over the top.
it is very over the top in its frivolity.
Seems like eventually they're just gonna toss it.
Well, eventually they may toss it, but I've got a lot of risk. I've got a lot of legal downside if they don't toss it. It seems like if I do nothing, a default judgment will be levied against me, and I'll then be behind the legal 8 ball and have to fight that. And I would imagine it's much more difficult to fight a judgment than it is to fight a ridiculous lawsuit.
It should be dismissed.
Yeah, it should be dismissed, I agree. And I'm going to be exploring an anti-SLAPP countersuit because I've learned since then that Alex Jones of InfoWars and Lee Stranahan and Leanne McAdoo, other journalists that you guys may have heard of, have been sued in a similar fashion by another individual. And so what this anti-SLAPP countersuit does is it can sanction the lawyer and the individual bringing a strategic lawsuit against public participation, not public policy, Dave. You got to study your law a little bit better. But the point of the matter is, this is a lawsuit being brought not against an actual defamation, because defamation is when a duplicitous, habitual liar, like the person who brought this lawsuit against me, goes into a public forum like YouTube and tells people that I am a Mossad agent, or that I am being paid by Mossad, or by the discovery process of his very own lawsuit, which this amendment states has not begun yet. Discovery process has not begun. This individual has gone into a public forum and told people that he has learned through that discovery that I'm being paid by Mossad. Now that is defamation. That is quite clearly a lie that he is telling, knowing it's a lie with the specific intent of damaging my reputation, hurting my ability to continue as a journalist. Yes, sir.
If somebody accused me of being a Mossad agent, I would consider that a feather in my cap.
Well, you know, what the audience member said is that if someone considered him a Mossad agent, he would consider that a feather in his cap. Maybe so. It's being done to me to disparage me and to make me appear as an enemy of the people of the United States and this person as a champion. Yes, Michelle.
Don't you have the option to sever the defendants, two separate cases?
Well, I don't know. I need to explore my options, but again, without hiring a lawyer, which would be several $1,000s, $10,000, $25,000, $50,000. I mean, these lawsuits.
You could make the application to sever yourself from other defendants, to have it be singular, and then this way you can defend yourself on the platform.
As an individual.
So the person there, Michelle, in the audience is saying that I should sever myself from the other defendants, and I think that's a very good idea. I am in the process of exploring my legal rights relative to this amended complaint, but I wanted to point out to you guys and to the audience on the internet how these tactics work, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to silence me. Similar people want to silence InfoWars, want to silence Lee Stranahan. Now, certainly when people go accusing people of being Mossad agents or pedophiles or doing other crimes that they don't have evidence of, that is worthy of a lawsuit if someone should choose to exercise their rights in that way. But when I say that someone who is lying is a liar, or that someone who, as evidence indicates, is committing charity fraud is a fraudster, that's a warning to the public to avoid giving money to this person because they are collecting money in a fraudulent manner. I would like this person to be criminally prosecuted. He's never answered the accusation of fraud. He hasn't come to me and said, hey, you've got it all wrong, here's the evidence. Hasn't done that, hasn't requested a retraction. He's initiated this punitive lawsuit, and he's gone through all these complicated steps of integrating these other defendants, and these other defendants are acting in wild and really incomprehensible ways, doing other things, generating a long list of additional civil torts that are now requiring me to answer these torts. And again, I believe this is being done specifically as a punitive measure to prevent me from reporting news, to prevent me from telling you about people like Harmon Wilfred, who is America's first political refugee. He is a former U.S. citizen who is now a stateless man, hasn't seen his children, hasn't seen his wife. The man can't work a job, can't earn a living, can't leave New Zealand. His wife's not allowed to enter New Zealand. I mean, this is a shocking level of oppression that's happening in the United States of America in 2018.
People knew, more Americans knew what George Bush did with this stuff, they wouldn't believe it. They would not believe it.
Which George Bush are you talking about?
The junior, the last one.
Well, I've got my objections of George Poppy Bush and George Bush Jr., but I think what we're looking at is a criminal syndicate that goes back, I say, to Lyndon Johnson and prior. But, you know, when we think about the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the rapid entry into the Vietnam War after that, and we're here obviously at the Veterans Association, may I ask, do we have Vietnam veterans among us?
I'm a Korean War veteran.
Korean War veteran. Well, thank you for your service, sir. I'm glad to see you here today. But of course, there are members of this Veterans Association who would be Vietnam veterans. And I've interviewed veterans of the Iraq War who have been subjected to chemical pollution from burn pits where chemicals and human waste and body parts and plastics were burned. And there are now hundreds of thousands of veterans who are suffering from multiple myeloma and a variety of complex rare diseases, who can't afford to pay for their medical care, who can't eat proper food, whose lives are miserable. And this is because of the misdoings of companies like Halliburton, Kellogg Brown and Root. These are the same companies that benefited and profited from the Vietnam War.
How about DuPont?
DuPont manufactured napalm and all kinds of chemicals. And I mean, again, we're talking about these companies that are military industrial contractors that seem to drive our political process. And when I try to make a news show supported by the people, for the people, and of the people, I'm met with this type of resistance.
So, the United States of America is in bad shape then.
The United States of America is in bad shape.
Sad.
It is very
It's like
sad.
Their own government. It's like all the third world countries.
The difference between where we are now and a third world country is that we're dealing with elements of the government. I don't want to destroy the government. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I want to eliminate people like Andrew McCabe, the corrupt former FBI deputy director, who pushed out honest agents like Robin Gritz, who suppressed investigations into real criminal activity with the Clinton Foundation and these secret email servers where the transactions of the Clintons and the State Department and companies like General Electric and Boeing, which are gigantic military contractors, they're suppressing these investigations. And now on Friday, we had the Inspector General's report from Michael Horowitz detailing the wrongdoing of these members of the FBI. We need to root out these corrupt elements. We need to eliminate the ability of CIA or former CIA or whoever these people are to infiltrate public areas of the internet, to subvert the trust of the public with lies and through clandestine cyber warfare tactics that some of these individuals have written manuals on, that they understand very well, that they are entrapping me and creating these complex situations, complex scenarios where they can do things that no one's ever going to hear about. If I didn't have this platform to come here and speak to you guys and put this information out on the internet, no one would know that ex-CIA agents and possibly corrupt attorneys are bringing frivolous lawsuits against me, these strategic lawsuits against public participation to prevent me from speaking to you fine people about these types of corrupt activities. That's what they're trying to do.
Now, President Kennedy, he was well loved. He was liked by a lot of people. What could he have possibly do that? I think 90% of American people believe that there was more than one Oswald. Had to be more than one. And Oswald was set up. But what was Kennedy doing that he ended up being assassinated?
For people that couldn't hear, the question was, what was President Kennedy doing that caused someone or multiple someones to want to assassinate him? Well, any answer would be speculative because I don't know.
Yeah.
But based on the incredible amount of evidence that's come forward since November 22nd, 1963, it seems to me that there were a large number of people who wanted John F. Kennedy dead. Some of the critical things that Kennedy wanted to do was he wanted to draw down the U.S. military presence in Vietnam, to have us completely out of Vietnam by 1965. He wanted to withdraw 1,000 per month of the military advisors that we had there working with the Vietnamese. He wanted to take them out. And he said that's their war, not our war. And by the end of 1965, all of them would be out. That was one thing. He wanted to eliminate something called the oil depletion allowance, which was a tax benefit that was given to Texas oil producers because so much of their money ostensibly was spent exploring for oil, which was a depleting asset. So by eliminating that oil depletion allowance, this would have cost the oil producers millions of dollars. And these Texas oil millionaires have subsequently become oil billionaires. Now, this is also my speculation, but of course, shortly after Lyndon Johnson's presidency, which ended in 1968, in 1971, Richard Nixon, who was in the mix, he was the vice president under Eisenhower, he ran against Kennedy. Well, Mr. Nixon took the US dollar off of the gold standard, and shortly after, his friend, Henry Kissinger, made a deal with the Royal House of Saud, the Saudi Arabian royal family, and all the rest of OPEC, that every country in the world buying or selling oil must use US dollars to conduct the transaction, period. That's it. They created a unit called the petrodollar, and this unit stands today. It was just last week that China began the petro-yuan, the first major country to challenge the petrodollar since 1973. Sir, do you know who the first leader of a country, who was the first guy to sell oil for euros? I'm sure you know. I heard it, Saddam Hussein. They killed him quickly. Do you know who the biggest proponent of an actual gold currency, an African dinar, to challenge the dollar and the euro on the world stage and to be the only currency? It was Gaddafi, and they killed him. Right. So it does seem that anyone who challenges this petrodollar system is met with an untimely death. And it does seem that there was a really strong effort to make oil the commodity upon which the value of the US dollar was based rather than gold. And of course, the Vietnam War, many would argue, was the first for-profit war that, you know, we weren't defending against some evil empire that was invading the United States. We sent men over to a foreign country to fight a foreign war that everyone in America was so disillusioned, and everyone involved. I don't know anyone who has anything positive to say about the Vietnam War. And look at what's happening now. Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, now Syria. What a disaster that Mr. Trump believed that another false flag story, very likely. Evidence indicates that this so-called gas attack was not initiated by Bashar Assad. Why would he? What would be the strategic value in gassing people? Anyone, even a violent dictator, even a madman, would know that the use of chemical gas, of weapons of mass destruction, would incur the wrath of the United States and surely guarantee his destruction. It doesn't make sense.
But why did Trump, how come
Well,
Trump
he
believe
only
that?
targeted the chemical plants where they're being manufactured and stored.
I'm hopeful that Mr. Trump is playing poker with us all, and that the attack that was initiated the other day was done to, as you said, sir, eliminate these chemical facilities. And I hope that the goal is not regime change in Syria, because I believe that would be a disaster, and that would just,
Terrorists would take over.
terrorists would take over. I agree with you, sir. Yes.
He's done this in the past, so why can't he do it now?
Who's done it in the past? Assad?
He did with Assad.
Actually, I don't believe that's true. There is a lot of evidence to indicate that the previous gas attack was also a staged incident. You always, by the terrorists who are there, by these so-called moderate rebels, who are actually not moderate rebels. They're members of ISIS. And of course, we remember General Flynn said that the creation of ISIS was a deliberate move. And he was blackballed. He was fired as the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was the first guy to be eliminated from the Trump cabinet. And of course, corrupt Andrew McCabe, according to the True Pundit, was in a meeting, and this was corroborated by other FBI agents. I'm going to show you this right here.
So we got our own government after us.
The government's turned against its people.
Deep state, bro.
I think that's very possible, sir. So True Pundit ran an article talking about, I'm sorry, I'm not able to find it right now, but apparently Mr. McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI, in a meeting at the FBI, stated his plan as we're going to F Flynn, and then we're going to F Trump. And they've succeeded with the first part of that plan. General Flynn is pretty effed. And he is facing an even more severe punitive lawsuit, a criminal situation, than what I'm facing. But it's a pattern and practice that these people utilize. As you said, are they the government? I don't know if my adversaries are the government, but they're certainly using the same tactics. A punitive lawsuit to stifle me. They can't challenge me with facts because they know they don't have the facts. So what they do is deception, manipulation, and lies.
When is the assassination details gonna come out after after so many years, isn't it public?
It's the question being, when will the details of Kennedy's assassination come out? There are so many details out already. Of course, Mr. Trump, didn't block the release of certain information. For people who have studied the assassination and are in the assassination research community, really nothing new came out when that so-called new information came out. But will they ever say, hey, by the way, these are the guys that did it? I think that's very unlikely. It's hard to say. You had a question, sir.
Yeah, my question is perhaps off the beaten path here. And it may be trivial in the grand scheme of things, but I've heard you and others refer to Donald Trump as Mr. Trump, others being those that don't consider him my president.
I do consider him the president, and I voted for him.
I've never heard Barack Obama, while he was sitting in the White House, referred to as Mr. Obama.
Well, I would refer to him
And
as
that kind of,
B-Rock, Barry. I do not hold Barack Obama in high regard at all, and Donald Trump is the president.
I've never heard him referred to as Mr. Obama.
Mr. Obama,
while he was sitting in the White House.
I have. I meant no disrespect, sir. Donald Trump is the 45th president of the United States, and I hope he'll be extremely successful.
And I consider you to be Mr.
Goodman.
Whoever, I'm Mr. Whoever.
President Trump.
President Trump. I would
President
appreciate
Trump.
that.
Forgive me.
That minor.
President Trump. I wish President Trump.
That minor consideration.
I wish President Trump a tremendous amount of success. I was very disappointed that he took the action that he did in Syria, because I do not believe we have sufficient evidence to determine that gas was used. I think we should have launched an investigation at very least, and we should have approached that situation with tremendous skepticism, because it just does not make strategic sense that the leader of Syria would launch that.
I agree with you on that point.
The only thing is, the leader of Syria was not the target of that attack. The chemical weapons in the factory, it was a surgical strike,
I hope you're
and
correct.
that's it.
I hope you're correct. I hope you're
So
correct.
we should accomplish, like Trump said, President Trump.
Well, it's very possible that President Trump may have been targeting ISIS facilities. And when I say he's playing poker, I mean he could be bluffing. He could be saying, yes, we're attacking Syria, because President Trump needs to deal with Boeing. President Trump needs to deal with the CIA. President Trump needs to deal with the NSA. President Trump has enemies all around him. So it's hard for me to anticipate what he will do or interpret what he says. I certainly voted for President Trump because I did not want war in Syria. I do not want war in the Middle East. I do not want us to continue spending money on bombs and planes and propaganda campaigns against the people of the United States. I want our country to go back to what it was when I was a kid, where everything was nice and we had freedom and privacy. And I mean, at least that was my impression. Perhaps I was mistaken, but it seems like in the past 30 or 40 years, we've been really heading in the wrong direction. And I think we're in a very historic time right now.
I think one of the biggest change was not only 9/11, but when Kennedy was shot. Two big things.
I think when you zoom out on it, the audience member was saying that Kennedy being shot was the biggest change. Well, I think it was an important, pivotal moment. I think it was the first time in modern history that a deceptive action was played out on television. And mass media was used to brainwash people, because everyone watched that on television, and right away, Walter Cronkite came on the TV and told you, "Good evening, America, Oswald shot from the 6th floor." And that was the truth. Mr. Cronkite told you the truth. And now we've got the internet, and if we understand that Operation Mockingbird was a CIA operation to control the flow of information on television and in newspapers to control people's thoughts, to make you think something about an incident. Well, now we've got Operation Mocking Tube, where the internet and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and these avenues are being manipulated and controlled to control the flow of information over the internet, so that different ideas, like the ones I'm presenting to you here today, are not allowed to compete in the marketplace of free ideas. They are suppressed by those who would rather sell you lies. Yes, Michelle?
OANN has been delving into the situation in Syria on the ground.
Yes.
They haven't found anyone in the town that agrees that Assad actually released chemical weapons, and they have said it was the rebels who set this up.
Right.
Because they wanted cover so that they could get out of the area, and they wanted the fire to come in from, the United States, the West.
That's right.
So that they could get out of the area. And they're the only station that I have found questioning that, although I have heard Tucker Carlson questioning it.
Right.
So,
So Michelle in the audience here is telling us that One America News Network has been reporting on information from the ground in Syria, saying that no one in Syria believes that Bashar Assad used the chemical weapons. One America News Network. Again, an independent network that has risen up in recent years and is sharing alternative ideas. But these are not, again, ideas that the powers that be, the military-industrial complex, the great billionaires of the world who control the flow of information, they don't want us to know that. They want us to listen to CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post and Fox News and these corporate-owned, advertiser-driven agendas.
Fox News is, who's on that? Who runs that?
Murdoch.
The Murdoch family owns that.
Well, is that Hannity?
Well, Hannity is on there, and I'm not trying to disparage every individual on every one of these networks. I'm just saying I feel that the business model of a giant someone mentioned Tucker Carlson. I enjoy Tucker Carlson. I think he does good reporting. But Tucker Carlson went to Las Vegas and said, hey, look at this footage of a helicopter taking off. He started investigating, and he met some resistance. And I could imagine, it's possible, I wasn't there, but I could imagine that someone at Fox might have said, hey, Tucker, how do you enjoy earning, what does he get paid, 10 million a year, 5 million, 20 million?
Right.
How do you like making $10 million a year? Maybe stop talking about Vegas.
What did he mean about the helicopter taking off?
Well, there were reports that there was firing from helicopters.
I just mean that Tucker went to Vegas
Right,
to
he
start
went to check it
investigating,
out.
and
Right.
the moment he veered off of the official story, he met resistance. Yes, sir.
One thing nobody's covered is no bombs, no helicopters, drones.
Drones.
Drones can deliver anything today. They can deliver packages and everything else. Very easy. Put them on board a drone or a couple of drones and cover an area.
Well, you're right. Drones, the audience member is saying that drones can cover everything. And certainly from the standpoint of a person in the military, utilizing a drone rather than a pilot-operated aircraft keeps servicemen and women out of the line of fire. But I'm also concerned about innocent people in innocent countries getting killed, so that General Dynamics or whoever is manufacturing the drones can sell a lot of drones. What I want us to get away from is a system where politicians and news channels and newspapers are paid by the billions of dollars that are earned from industries that pollute the world, destroy countries, have no conscience, even companies that would destroy our own servicemen and women by being irresponsible in how waste is handled in a combat zone. I did an interview with a filmmaker who's got a film called Delay, Deny, Wait Until You Die, about veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan who are suffering from these exotic diseases due to the irresponsible way in which these private companies are managing the war effort in lieu of the U.S. Army, and with the shareholders and the dollar being the bottom line rather than the safety of the members of armed services. So these are all very serious concerns. And as I talk about these things, I'm being met with tremendous resistance. And the people that are providing the resistance need to be stopped. If the things that I'm saying are wrong, I'm delighted to be corrected. If I've done something that's wrong, I will stand up and own up to that. But for people to make up lies and for people to bring these fraudulent lawsuits that are just devoid of any evidentiary value or any actual merit, well, these people are the lowest of the low. And I want as many people as possible to know about this so that we can collectively be aware, so that we can identify this, and so that we can put a stop to it. I want to thank everybody for joining me here tonight. I want to encourage everyone to watch Crowdsource the Truth. I didn't really get into some of the other cyber attack techniques that have been utilized, but anonymous accounts on YouTube and Twitter are being used to slander, to malign, to attack me, to submit complaints to YouTube on certain videos to get those videos blocked, to put punitive measures on my YouTube accounts. I had a YouTube channel that was reaching almost 58,000 viewers, and anonymous accounts made complaints that have locked me out of that account, and now my reach has been diminished to less than 5,000. So there are really, underhanded techniques being utilized to try to keep this information out of the free market of ideas, where the best ideas will survive. And I think these people are afraid of these ideas, and they're afraid of confronting these ideas on a level playing field. So they must cheat, and they must do deceptive and duplicitous things to skew the playing field in their favor, and it's disgraceful. And I want everyone who's able to support this effort. And if that can be done by sharing a video, that's fantastic. If that can be done by sponsoring the channel, that's fantastic. If that can be done by just starting your own YouTube channel, starting your own email campaign, you guys have all taken the time out of your day to come here today and meet. You've got a movement here. So it's important that we share these ideas, that we spread the word, and that we do not allow the people that would act in this way and manipulate our government and manipulate our media and manipulate the flow of ideas. It's important that we do not allow these individuals to continue. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Is there another question? No, thank you. Thank you very much.